Let's go back to Orlando now with the play-by-play on tonight's game on ESPN. He also hosts several shows on ESPN, College Football Live, Game Day with basketball, football. Rece Davis is on the program. Rece, first question, got to lead with this. Who has a bigger bounce-back game this week? Our alma mater, BYU, or your alma mater, Alabama?
Both of them are, I think, push. Both of them need a bounce back for sure. I probably in terms of the big picture, Alabama's is national championship, all of that type of thing. Their hopes are sort of riding on a bounce back. For BYU, we were talking in the meeting earlier about whether BYU could get into the picture for the New Year's Six still, despite the loss to Utah State and the loss to Taysom Hill. I think that's a pretty tall mountain to climb right now. But we've seen unprecedented things. Last week we saw for the first time in the history of the AP poll, 5 of the top 8 lost on the same weekend. So I think it would be premature to say never, but certainly it seems like a big one. But BYU needs to win to make sure to keep the season from coming unraveled. A lot of injuries right now in addition to Taysom Hill. So it's a pretty important game for them tonight, I think.
Rece Davis will have the play-by-play tonight, also the host of College Football Final, which I make sure I watch every Saturday night. Last Friday, what a big game for BYU. So what kind of relevance hit did BYU take with the loss of Taysom Hill and the loss in the game?
I would love, because I know who I'm talking to and I know my audience, I would love to downplay it, but I can't. It was huge because Taysom had an opportunity, I think, with the right set of circumstances to at least get an invitation to New York for the Heisman Trophy. And again, if BYU had been able to remain undefeated and perhaps some on its schedule had worked out, let's say Virginia keeps winning, let's say Cal puts together a pretty good season. At the end, it looks pretty good. Maybe Texas improves. The overall resume would have looked pretty good, and maybe there was the opportunity to be placed in one of those New Year's Six bowls. That's a tough order for BYU without a perfect record due to its independent status. But I think those two things in terms of perception and opportunity on a national stage, I think it was a gargantuan hit for the injury and the loss.
So, Rece, with Taysom Hill out tonight, what do you expect from this BYU team?
I don't know, just to be honest about it, because it's been a short week. Talking to Bronco yesterday, only 2 days of practice. Christian Stewart, other than the second half against Utah State, is really a complete unknown. And in a lot of ways, I think it's like a season-opening game when you don't know what to expect from your quarterback. You don't know if Alani Fu is going to be able to play. So I think there are a lot of unknowns, and the one thing you can't measure is how a team is going to respond to something catastrophic like that. Do they feel that all is lost? And understandably, all of the guys and the coaches are saying the right things, and I'm sure they want to do the right things in terms of responding properly and finishing the season the way it ought to be finished. But sometimes you can't account for the shock and the emotion of having something happen like that. Yep. And so because of that, I don't know exactly what to expect. I think under ordinary circumstances that this BYU team is a little better than UCF, but it remains to be seen how they'll play tonight and really how UCF will play tonight, because they've got a conference to compete in, and they're 1-0 in that league, but they're a little bit desperate too. UCF is very fortunate that they aren't 1-3 with their only decisive victory being against Bethune-Cookman. So it's a little bit of a desperate time for them as well.
ESPN's Rece Davis is on BYU Sports Nation. You can watch Rece do the play-by-play tonight on ESPN, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You mentioned UCF and where they're at. I'm wondering who needs the game more, who needs the win.
I think BYU, because if nothing else, UCF can turn back next week and get into the meat of their conference schedule. So because of that, I think because of the perception to generate a little bit of recovery from what happened last Friday night, I think, look, both teams need it. You only get so many opportunities to play games, so you want to win them all. I understand that. But I guess if you're looking at it from an objective, detached measure of who would benefit more from the win and who would be damaged more by the loss, I would have to give that edge to BYU, that they need it more.
A lot to play for, and less meaningful context for BYU without a conference. The ranking meant everything for BYU. So I want to ask you this, Rece. Can BYU survive in the long term as an independent in this college football landscape?
So, I mean, it depends on your definition of survive.
I guess
now, if you're
thrive.
Talking,
How about thrive?
Okay, if you're talking about in terms of being a viable program, having successful seasons, getting good players, being threats to the quote-unquote big boys, I would say absolutely. I mean, there's too much history there. There's the depth of the following of the program is too great, I think, for it to just wither away because they're not in a conference. But if you're asking me what would put them in best position to compete for championships, I would think that they would need to be in a league. And it's completely evidenced by their situation with the group of 5 conferences this year. A scenario right now is, let's say, for instance, BYU wins the game tonight, beats UCF, and then UCF kind of gets its act together, and they go on and they win the American. Okay, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a group of 5 conference champion. And just to clue everybody in, and we're all learning this new terminology together, those are the 5 conferences outside the Power 5 conferences. The highest-ranked group of 5 champion gets a spot in one of those New Year's Six bowls. It's an easier path for those schools than we had under the old BCS system.
Yeah,
yep, it is.
But BYU's outside of that. They're sort of in that nether world, and they're not even in the same position that Notre Dame is in. Notre Dame, at least has an arrangement with the Orange Bowl that they get in periodically. There's minimum, maximum number of takes for Notre Dame during that period. But there's an avenue for Notre Dame even when they don't make the playoff. And with all due respect, Notre Dame still carries a little more weight nationally than BYU, so they're going to be in a little better position in the large pool most of the time. So I think long term, the best case scenario, if BYU could find a conference that fits, I think that would probably be helpful to them. But that said, I do think there's enough brand name and enough depth to the following that if they can put together, great seasons as it appeared they might be able to this year, there's a wonderful opportunity for them as an independent as well. And if you look at the scheduling and what they've been able to do, and what they're going to be able to do in the next few years, what they have, what is it next year? Nebraska, UCLA, and Michigan, I think, or something like that. Yep. I think that's right.
All on the road.
And most years, having Texas on the schedule suffices too. That's just bad luck that Texas is not what it was and what it's going to be. So that's just bad luck. But the schedule is representative, and certainly the number of Mountain West teams they play, I think that's a legitimate part of the schedule. So, they can do it. There's just not much margin for error.
So you don't think even with a good schedule like next year, going on the road, playing these tough opponents for a non-P5 school like BYU to make it into the playoffs if they were to run the table?
Oh, no. Absolutely they can. If they run the table against a schedule like that, there's no question that they'll be a viable playoff contender and have a great opportunity to get in the playoffs. So if I said that or implied that, I didn't mean to. I just meant that there's no margin for error once they lose. And you're also subject to use again the Texas example from this year, you're subject to how good is the team that we have scheduled, or how good are the teams. Now, if you hit it just right and you get good UCLA, good Nebraska, good Michigan, in addition to your normal schedule, well, then you're going to be able to, that committee will look at that and say that's as good a schedule as anybody played, and
right.
or pretty much anybody, and they're going to be in good shape. But the problem comes is when you run into one of your quote-unquote big non-conference games turns out to be a team that is not what it normally is, like Texas is, or Virginia's better this year, but they've been down a little bit. Cal was awful last year. Looks as if you might be getting a break with that at the end, and it might turn out that that's a pretty solid game against a solid Pac-12 team.
ESPN's Rece Davis is on BYU Sports Nation. He has the call tonight, 7:30 Eastern Time on ESPN. With that said, do you think a non-P5 will ever make the college football playoff?
Probably. They probably will. It's going to be hard, but really you're only talking about a few schools who are even in position. BYU is one of them.
Yep.
maybe Boise State, or one of the better Mountain West teams. I don't know if any of the American schools. You know what? I take that back. If UCF playing the schedule it plays this year, and they did a good job with their non-conference schedule going Penn State, Missouri, BYU.
How about East Carolina?
East Carolina did a great job with its schedule this year. If they had beaten South Carolina, you'd probably get into the conversation. The problem is the week in, week out strain of an SEC schedule, of a Pac-12 schedule, a Big 12 schedule. I think, at least for the most part this year, that makes you have to be perfect. It makes you have to run the table plus have 2 or 3 of those non-conference wins that look pretty good. But I would say that I think we're in this system for 12 years. I would say that there will be at least one, because all you have to do is look back and see how close in 2009, that you had a couple from outside the big conferences in TCU and Boise State, both of whom went undefeated, and probably one of whom would have made a playoff.
So you're telling us there's a chance.
I'm telling
us we have a chance.
I'm telling you, it's not as good a chance as the Pac-12 team, for instance,
right.
but a chance. Yeah.
Let's fast forward to the end of the regular season this year. Who are the 4 that you think, at this point, based on what you've seen, get into the playoff?
Those are 2 very different questions. Now, how I have them stacked up at this moment, and how I do it, and I release these every week on Twitter, is it's not a scientific formula. I don't say 40% this, 40% that, 20% that, but I try to balance in some way what I know about a team and what I believe about them. I guess the best way to describe that would be the eye test. A heavy part of it is what you have done this year. And some of it, there's just a hint. There's far less of this, but a little bit of projection of how I think you'll do. Like right now, I have it stacked up: Auburn, Mississippi State, Florida State, and Ole Miss. Now, those are not going to be the 4 in the playoff because, number one, they play each other. I've got Notre Dame, I think, sitting at 6. I think I have TCU 5, and I'm not sure I believe that.
Ooh,
but
TCU.
I have
Say this
TCU
week.
5. Well, the reason I have TCU 5 is because they have the best win of the season.
Right.
I thought Oklahoma was the best team, and they beat them. So to me, they have the best win, and they've earned it. Do they have staying power? I suspect not. But right now, I think they've earned that spot. Arizona the same way. Arizona beat a somewhat, on the offensive line anyway, depleted Oregon team. That right there is victory 1A to me. So they deserve to be in the top 7 or 8. I don't think they'll have the staying power there. So I don't think those will be the teams that are there. I think Florida State is a virtual lock. The only team that can beat Florida State on its schedule without Florida State really playing poorly is Notre Dame and maybe Louisville on Thursday night, though I'm not convinced of that. I think Florida State will be in the playoff for sure. I would be lying to you if I told you which SEC West team. I still think Oklahoma will be in the playoff. And then a team from the SEC West. Right now, that would look to be Auburn, I would think. I think Auburn's a little notch above Mississippi State, and Alabama has some things to clean up if they're going to get back into the picture. And the 4th team, I thought all year that it would be a Pac-12 team, but it's hard right now to see that the Pac-12 champion might have 2 or 3 losses.
Yeah.
So I think there's an opportunity for that 4th spot to be a little bit of a wild card. And I would be throwing darts blindfolded if I told you who I thought for sure that 4th team would be.
He has intestinal fortitude, and he can matriculate with the best of them. Rece Davis, we appreciate the time.
All right, guys. See you later.